A new mod is coming that will open up hundreds of games to be played in basic VR, with the potential for many of those to get motion controls added in the future. I've talked about this before. It's the Unreal Engine Injector by Praydog. That's the same modder who made the Resident Evil games playable in VR with motion controls. I've actually been testing this new mod, so I want to go over how it works, some of its features, and I'll also give a few game recommendations that I've already played with it. Before that, let me give an update on other mods that have either released or are in development. First, Bendy and the Ink Machine released out of early access for free, so it's no longer behind Team Beef's Patreon, although I still recommend donating if you enjoyed the game and the mod. This is PC VR only, unlike most other Team Beef mods, and it features full motion control support. The game's a horror puzzler with a unique old-style Mickey Mouse look to it. It's great to experience this world in VR, and personally I didn't find it very scary, so if you don't normally like horror games, I still recommend giving it a try. A mod with motion controls released for Metal Hellsinger. This is a rhythm shooter with a Doom look and feel to it. It uses heavy metal music, which ramps up depending on how much you shoot into the beat, and it has leaderboards for each level. The only thing I'm going to say about this one is it's a very heavy game. The heaviest VR game I've tried, and even within RTX 3080, I struggle getting 45 to 50 FPS. And I ended up using motion smoothing, which I don't usually use, but it was the only way I could get it playable for me personally. There is a demo for the game, so you can try it before you buy. Battlefront 2, the newer 2017 version of the game, has got a VR mod which is now available in alpha. You can access that through the modders Discord channel, and I'll put a link for it in the description. This is using AER like Luke Ross's mods, but I've heard that performance is actually really good in the game, although I haven't tried it myself yet. You can only use it in private lobbies at the moment, and the single player campaign isn't fully playable yet. It's got some basic motion control support, where you're kind of aiming like a laser pointer. This is alpha though, and it's still very early, so if you do try this, just understand that it's going to have issues and it's not going to be a polished mod yet. Personally, I'm waiting to see how it develops before I jump in. The Half-Life 2 Episode 1 VR mod is due for release on Steam as its own game in March, and just like the Half-Life 2 VR mod, it will be a very polished VR game with full motion controls, manual reloading and ladder climbing. Half-Life 2 VR Mod also now has official workshop support, and we're already seeing mods pop up like having forearms instead of floating hands, as well as full campaigns being ported over from flat, like a Resident Evil 2 campaign. Kerbal Space Program has a mod which has been available for a while, but Jonathan has been doing some amazing work making it feel like a native VR game, with motion control support for most things in the game, so you're actually physically pressing and flicking switches, turning handles, and now you can even grab the world to pull yourself around in 0G. A Flat to VR Discord member, Ashok, has been working on getting Black Mesa playable in VR using the Half-Life 2 VR code for motion controls and weapons. This is not going to be the full game just like it is Flat, simply because he doesn't have access to the source code for Black Mesa, so he's having to replace a lot of different enemies with ones from Half-Life 2 VR. Luke Ross has a new mod for Hogwarts Legacy, which is now available through his Patreon. As with all his mods, it's got no motion controls, and this one's early access, so it's got some issues right now, and as with his other mods, it uses AER, and it's also a hard game to run, so I only recommend it if you've got a very high-end PC. One last thing to mention before I talk about the Unreal Injector, is I mentioned in a previous video that Ready or Not will be getting motion controls added. This was originally going to be through the Injector, but the developers have actually added the VR plugins back into the game, so now the Injector isn't needed. Work's already started behind closed doors, with no release date, no footage, and there's nowhere to keep up to date with it yet, but it's happening and it's going to be great. If you want to keep up to date with all things VR mods, then the Flat to VR Discord is a great place to hang out, or you can follow the Flat to VR Twitter, links are in the description. So let's talk about the Injector. This thing is actually incredible, and it's going to be one of the best things to happen to VR gaming on PC. It works by utilising code that already exists in the Unreal Engine, but most of the time this code's stripped away by developers to avoid issues. But Praydog has been able to create an injector that reactivates this code and forces games to work in the headset in perfect stereo 3D, just like a native VR game. You have full 6 degrees of freedom with head movement, so you can look around and lean in for a closer view. But it doesn't have full room scale by default, so first person stuff, the body won't follow your head movements, and while you can use motion controls as a gamepad, your hands aren't going to be tracked by default. Praydog and some other very talented modders have been working in the background on some plugins that are going to make things easier to add motion controls. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but without these tools, you would need to be very skilled in C++ and some reverse engineering. And these plugins will make things a little more user friendly, so more people can mod and add things like motion controls to games that work with the Injector. As a test, Praydog added motion controls to Severed Steel, which is a fast-paced shooter. Using the Injector is very easy. You simply install some files anywhere on your computer. I personally have them on a folder on my desktop. You start the game, and then you Alt-Tab out and double-click on the Unreal application. You find the game's exe in the drop-down menu, and you click Inject. Now a mod menu will pop up in the game. Wait for VR to initialize, put on the headset, and it will show in VR. This includes all the menus, and things like UI is also working in most games with a few exceptions. Praydog's put in a lot of time and effort to find a way to make the menus and UI work universally, and he's done an amazing job. You can even adjust the position and size of it to how you like it. He's done a lot of work on making the mod menu as user-friendly as possible, and some of this stuff is still being tweaked, but when you have the headset on, the mod menu is in the centre of your view so that you can see it, and you can either use your mouse or a gamepad to adjust things. Some of the settings include being able to adjust the camera position, so you can tweak the camera forward slightly if you have clipping with the in-game body, like I personally did with Gravel. Or you can just make your own custom camera where you bring it closer or further away to stuff, like third-person games, and then you can save presets so that you can quickly switch between them. You can also play around with world scale so you can make things feel bigger. For example, the scale felt a little off in Jedi Fallen Order, so I tweaked it down to 0.85 and now it feels perfect. But you can also go higher and make it feel more like a dollhouse effect, like little miniatures in front of you, like in Demio. When it comes to motion controls, Praydog has mentioned that he would like to add support to a couple of other games to give good examples on how it's done, and this will help other modders add them to other games. This is how it actually started with Unity games, with a couple of people figuring out how to do it, then other people using their work as examples, and now we've got lots of Unity games like Outer Wilds, Raft and Valheim, all with VR mods with full motion controls, and I expect the same thing is going to happen with Unreal Engine games once the Injector is released. When is it going to actually get released? Well, there's no release date, but it is close, but we need to be a little bit more patient and give Praydog the time to get it finished to a point where he's happy. Just to give some examples of games that I've played and some other testers have played, I already mentioned Jedi Fallen Order. I've been playing Gravel, which is an off-road racer, a bit like the Dirt series, and this actually feels like native VR support. Platformers work great, like Psychonauts 2, because you get a great sense of depth, which helps you place your character better in the game world. What Remains of Edith Finch was one of my highlights with the Injector, but it's not for the weak-stomached gamers, because you've got lots of forced head movement, but it was a real trip in VR. Some recent releases, which have been tested and work, are Callisto Protocol, Hogwarts Legacy, Returnal, and Atomic Heart. We've got upcoming games like Jedi Survivor. There are a couple of really cool dinosaur games on the horizon that I really want to see in VR, like The Lost Wild. Judith, the new game coming from the Bioshock creator, is Unreal Engine. There's so many big developers that are switching to Unreal Engine 5, and there are so many great smaller indie games already out there I didn't even know about that I've discovered since playing around with this Injector. So what's left to do? Well, Praydog's currently working on some back-end rendering stuff. He's trying to get things like ASW and motion smoothing that will work well with the mod. At the moment, the mod only supports decoupled head movement, so the gun has to be aimed with a mouse or a thumbstick, but some sort of gun face should be possible with a plugin in the future. I can't express to you how great it is to play some of these games in VR, and a lot of them look surprisingly clear in the headset, even with temporal anti-aliasing. Anyway, that's all for this mod update. As always, thank you to those who've shown me support and made it to the end of the video. It really does mean a lot to me.